Luke, you have some great reporting on the January 6th committee's meeting with Stephen Miller. I want to hear all about it. I want to put a two-part question to you. One, you report that Miller invoked executive privilege when asked about January 6th call with Trump and argued that the election had been stolen. He maintains the lie about the 2020 election results. And then there's this unbelievable bit of reporting in your story that says this: Mr. Miller rebutted the implication that the word "we" indicated that Trump was trying to incite the crowd to action, one of the people said, arguing that it had been used in political speech for decades, including by President John F. Kennedy in reference to the moon landing. Wow. Explain.
Yes. So the January 6th committee was pressing, the investigators on the committee were pressing Stephen Miller in this interview yesterday about Donald Trump's speech at the Ellipse on January 6th, where he encouraged the mob to, or what would become the mob, the crowd at the time, to march on the Capitol, to fight what he called election fraud, and to try to keep him in office. And so they kept asking, who was he talking to? What did he mean when he said "we"? Was this his intent? And so they were trying to get at whether or not he intended to incite the crowd. And Stephen Miller argued, according to our sources in this interview, that this speech was a normal speech. It was routine, and that it was using the sort of rhetoric that he compared to other great presidents at great moments in history. And he, argued with the committee. He pushed back and claimed the election was stolen. And, he claimed that this speech, there was nothing wrong with it. And so my understanding from, and now this is according to sources, we weren't sitting in the room, but that this at times was a quite combative and pugnacious interview.
So the problem with the actual claim itself, and I'll leave the nature of the witness alone, but the problem with the argument itself is that the facts belie the argument. Because once we marched on the Capitol, and at the time in the speech, the line says, "I will go with you." Once it turned violent, if he didn't mean we will engage in medieval, brutal hand-to-hand combat that causes traumatic brain injuries and physical disabilities and leads to death by the Capitol police officers, there's a podium, there's a briefing room, and there are correspondents for every news organization in the world to go down and say, whoa, that's not what I meant. We will do. We all know Trump didn't do that. He didn't ever do that until his daughter and others begged him to make a lame video in which he said, "We love you." So what about the fact problem that Stephen Miller's testimony represents, Eugene?
That's exactly right. All of the things you just laid out make it very hard to believe that this speech by itself was just a normal speech. It's almost impossible to believe. And it also doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? The speech itself that happened on January 6th is also connected to all of the behavior months before and after the election, where then President Trump was talking about the election was going to be stolen from him because of people were allowed to mail in their ballots after the election, the day of the election, talking about that. And so it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And the investigators know that. We know this. I mean, Stephen Miller knows this, that all of these things are connected. And it's a reminder to all of us, I don't need to remind you two, but it is a reminder to viewers that the committee is not just looking at what the actual actions on January 6th by that crowd, but everyone connected in the before and after of what happened on January 6th, because all of these things are interconnected.
Look, what is your sense of where the committee heads? I had Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren on at the beginning of the week, and I know they took some exception to the report that they'd reached this evidentiary hurdle, that if they wanted to make a criminal referral, they had enough evidence. But in the course of the interview, she confirmed the reporting that they had indeed reached that evidentiary hurdle. So what do they do now? They've got enough evidence, if they chose to make a criminal referral, to do so. What is the final, Eugene referred to sort of this final stage of the investigation. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think they are getting close to the end here. They're still doing something around 20, 30, 40 interviews a week, depending on the week. It's believed that they could wrap up at the end of this month. they've sort of, I mean, there's still a couple big names out there that they haven't called in and haven't announced a decision on that could be the final interviews. But they are in the closing stages here. We do know from their court filings, from our own reporting, that they do have a very strong case here. They may be bringing some people back in for a second interview or even a third interview to try to get a few more details out of them as they look to shore up this report. But then they're going to move to educating the public on what they've found. And so, you know, I think close watchers of your show probably know this case very well, but there's a lot of people out there in the country who have turned off paying attention to January 6th. And so how can they bring back in those people and make them aware of their explosive findings once they're ready to release them? So I think that's their big question now.